Thank you for tuning in to Victorious in Recovery. It's been a pretty good week so far. I had to go back to Oklahoma City and go to my grandma's funeral, so that always brings up some feelings and, not to mention seeing the family. There's just all kinds of things, but for the most part, it's been pretty good. While I was on my way up there, I got a message, and it was recommending me to call somebody because we have the same faith. And while I was talking to this person, it became obvious that there was a struggle with their perception of God, and maybe with some questions, about why. That question we ask ourselves so often: why, God? Why? And she's telling me these stories and everything, and I understand, like I can feel what she's saying. And then the conversation progresses, and she's just kind of getting it off her chest and everything. But at one point, she's like, and I just don't know how to move past step 2 and go to step 3 because I'm having this crisis of faith. And so I had to... Thankfully, I prayed right before we had the conversation. I was like, God, please just help me say the right things, because there's so much that can go wrong on a conversation like that. But what ended up happening was I kind of went through the basics, and the basics of the requirements really for step 3 isn't that we have an understanding of God. It's not necessary for me to understand what or why God does things, how he could possibly do things. None of that is really a requirement. I mean, yeah, someday it would be nice to know why, but that's really not for me to even know. And so she's describing this issue that she's having with God after all these losses and everything. So I just told her my experience. My experience was because I had some issues too that kept me from getting clean and sober. And it was a twofold issue. One was that the God I believed in, I had some flaws because what I thought he should be, he wasn't. And on the other side of that, if he was, then I wasn't worthy. And so it's like a twofold thing, and I know that a lot of us go through that. But what really helped me is a simple little thing. And I read something the other day that kind of opens the door to describing that. It says, having a relationship with God requires openness, open hands, and an open heart. We need to keep our ears open to what he has to say, and our mind open to what he asks us to do. We don't need to know the details of the future to fully trust God with it and obediently take each step he places before us. And I think that is a very maybe churchy Christian way of describing something that we've been taught in the programs, the 12-step programs, for a long time. And that is that I don't have to understand God. It is enough to just make a list of what I need God to be in my life. And my list included things like I needed him to be a good father. I needed him to be understanding and patient with me. I needed him to be loving and dependable. I needed him to be strong enough to fix me. And I needed him to be willing to. And so those plus, probably 50 other things were on my list of things. And having made that list, then I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to that God, those capabilities, to an entity that could accomplish all of that. So really, the decision I made was, if God is real, if God is good, if God is patient with me, etc., etc., etc. If, then I turn my will and my life over to the care of that God. And luckily for us, God is capable. God is willing. And He's powerful. And He has a good plan for my life. And I can depend on Him explicitly to take care of me, even when I don't know what to ask for. Even when I stand in my own way, He finds a way as long as I'm willing to let Him. And in the Christian church, they've been telling this to us for forever. They say, come as you are. You don't have to be perfect to become a Christian. If anything, we become Christians so that God can start His work in us. There's no previous requirements. We can come as is. And we're not just welcome, we're like loved and embraced. It's like when you walk into that first 12-step meeting and they're like, hey, I'm so-and-so, welcome. Take a seat. Do you want some coffee? Would you like a list of numbers of men that can support you, that can be there for you? And then you go through this meeting and you hear your own story. And then at the end, what happens? They say, hey, come back tomorrow. Or, if you have a really good meeting that you go to, they might take you out to lunch or dinner or whatever afterwards. But the key is that it wasn't required that I would not go home and drink. It wasn't required that I knew how to manage my feelings. It wasn't even required for me to not be a felon. The only requirement was my desire to stop drinking, just like to be accepted into the kingdom of heaven. The only requirement is that you accept it, is that you be willing to accept that help from God. The parallels between those two things are endless. And sorry if I got off on a little bit of a tangent, but I'm super passionate about this one thing. Because I would have never cultivated, I would have never felt worthy of cultivating a relationship with God if it hadn't been for that list that I made. If it hadn't been for my list of requirements. And don't worry, God's not worried about how long your list is. He can take care of it. There's not any request that's too small or too big. But we do need to have it on the list so that we can make that decision, so it can be an informed decision, so that there's a commitment and an accountability to that decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of that God. And the cool part of it is that you don't really have to know it's going to work, because once you actually are willing and make that decision, it's going to become clear really quickly that it will work. So I'll leave you guys with this, and I've said this a few times before, but God knows your situation. It's not too big for Him to handle, and He does have a good plan for your life. Thank you for tuning in. Y'all have a good one. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to show your support for the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me, follow me on Instagram or Facebook at Victorious in Recovery. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.